Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision33. And today I'm very happy to have an old friend, Niels Stenfeldt, with me. We haven't spoken for years. And when I recently saw a posting he put on LinkedIn, I liked so much what he said and was referring to that I said, this is a great opportunity to reconnect with Niels. So Niels, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing these days.
Oh, thank you, Carl. And yes, indeed, many years we haven't spoken, but when I saw you on the other day, it was kind of like back at where we started. We met for the listeners. We met actually back in 2007, I think, first time. And that time I was the global VP of SAP Business One, working in SAP out of Waldorf. And over the years, I have stayed very close to the SAP Business One ecosystem as chairman for Boyum IT that makes the additions to SAP Business One. I'm still chairman there, so I've followed it ever since I left SAP back in 2009. Yeah. In the period, I've also run various different type of businesses, both within the enterprise software space, but also in some of the other adjacencies around software for small-sized or mid-sized businesses or even larger enterprises as well. So this has been my field of expertise for, I usually say, 15 plus years. That way I don't appear that old. And right now I'm primarily working with some private equity companies, trying to figure out what is the next thing I need to do, because I were at a place where one of the themes we're going to talk about in this podcast about trust and how you think wasn't the right place for me, and I took the consequence of that, and that was probably also one of the reasons I wrote the note I did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Niels, I can't tell you again how good it is just to see you here today and to speak with you and revive a good friendship. The article you wrote was about trust in the business place, but it was also about kind of tolerance for whether you call it inappropriate behavior or inappropriate function on the part of employees, and the issue of accountability. In general, how do those things play together in the life of an employee?
I think it very much plays well together, because I think trust is one of the most important things as a leader you need to make sure is present in the organization you lead, you work with, and in general operate with. And their tolerance is absolutely critical. And I think one of the challenges we have in today's society is that at one hand, we obviously want to tolerate as much as possible because we want to include, we want to accept the differences. But what we should never tolerate is poor performance, poor behavior, these type of things, because at once you may, as a leader, say, "Oh, it can be hard to refill. Maybe we should hold on a little bit longer, or maybe we should keep that person on for a little bit longer." But what you often forget is that those that do perform just sits there and wonder, why is A or B or C still here? Because they're just a nightmare to work with. And that negativity, where you actually tolerate a bad behavior of one, actually are super negative for those employees who are behaving very well. And I think that's it. This is where you would just misunderstand the concept of tolerance, because you should not tolerate the bad behavior. And I think that was part of it, because then as a leader, the good ones will look at you and say, "Can't you make your decision? Can't you do the changes that everybody can see?" And then your leadership, the value of you as an individual, simply just diminishes over time, and who want to work for a person who have that. So that was kind of what's triggered. And then there was a couple of posts from some previous colleagues and friends I have that also made me just generally wonder about, there is a theme here.
Yeah, you touched on something that, at least in the US, I don't know if it's the same in Denmark, but a lot of those very small businesses are having trouble recruiting staff. And then they even have trouble keeping staff. And there's some government policies that are creating some of that backlash and frustration, but they seem very reluctant. Customer service, if you go to a restaurant, for instance, today, is not what it used to be, because of the quality of the staff and their knowledge and all kinds of things. But they seem very reluctant to sort of, as a friend of mine used to say, trim the herd, because they can't find other people to take their place. What kind of an impact, just from a sociability perspective, do you think that'll have in business? Because it might take us a couple more years to recover from that.
I think, first of all, I think this problem already exists. I think everybody knows that there is a growing challenge. But I always go back to my key point. What is worst? Is it worse to keep a person on the staff and then see all the good ones trimming their CVs and waiting for somebody to call? Because that's what's going to happen. Or is it worse to maybe be a little bit short on headcount because you got the bad one out, but you got happiness, you got energy back to those who are already delivering. And I think the math there is pretty simple. There is no point in keeping dead weight. Excuse my language here. I'm a Dane, so we don't have so many words. But the thing is, it have a bigger negative impact on the good ones to keep the bad ones than it has to keeping the bad ones with a bad excuse of, well, it's hard to find somebody else.
Yeah,
People
I'd rather
will
be
willing to work a little bit harder if they see that they are rewarding those who deliver the good job. So I think it's just a bad excuse and it's bad leadership.
Yeah, I would rather be able to say I have a really small team, but they're really, really good and they really support each other and we're all on board one with another. That'd be a better place to work from my perspective.
I believe so.
Yeah. So how does an employer create this sort of atmosphere, environment of trust? What are the things that make that actually happen? You can't flip the switch, right? But what are the things that can compose that over time?
I think there's a couple of questions in that question. So with all due respect, I may start somewhere else. It's not just a matter of how, it's as much a matter of who. Because before you go to the how, there's a couple of, I would say, base things we need to first understand. And one of them being, who is it? And first of all, trust and having that environment is something that has to be delivered by everyone who are employed in the organization. As a leader, I can trust and foster trust, but I cannot, and I can do that with my leadership, but it has to be created by all the people in the organization, not just me, everybody. So you have to think that, you have to have that, in my opinion, as a mindset. The other thing you need to know is, if we talk about, we want to create a more trustful workplace, let's use that as a term. It is like sailing. If you want to come to a point, you need to know where you are. So there is also that, where am I? Before I can put a direction, I need to know where I'm at and where I'm going. Then you can put a direction. And there, for me, it's about trying to take a look at what I refer to as the low trust indicators. And I think we it's not rocket science to know what is the level of trust in the organization I'm at. If you have a lot of employee turnover, if you have hard time recruiting, it's actually probably one of the reasons, because people know, hey, this ain't a fun place to work. If the energy is low, the productivity is low, there's burnout, who want to work there? And again, that leads to finger pointing. This is where all the water cooler talks are running. You end up with a lot of rules where you have to define what you cannot do to compensate for the bad ones you have there, the bad culture. The innovation sucks. Nobody shares information because you don't really trust anyone. You don't really have a lot of respect. And then you get that passive aggressive behavior. And then everybody eventually resign. And then in comes the very good friend of that, which is the cynicism. So that is, for me, how you spot a low trust culture. Now, if you want to create a high trust culture or go in that direction, you have to start at the very top. Board, chairman, CEO, this is where it starts. Middle managers can do some, but if it doesn't start at the very top, it will never get there. So for me, the how is as much from where, so from where it starts from the top. And then you can have that discussion about, okay, we were here, these were the low trust indicators we have now. How do we want to have the high trust? Well, you want fun and laughter, because nobody laughs with colleagues if they don't trust them, because that's a good way of signaling, hey, I actually trust you. You have that positive team building behaviors like gratitude, empathy, candor in your conversation. You want to be, open and vulnerable as a person and speak freely and listen to others. And that gives you the high confidence. But trying to get those two things up against each other will tell you what is the size of the gap. And then you can, as a leader, begin addressing and say, where is it we have the problem? Is it about accountability? Is it about the transparency as the norm? That's the problem. Do we have the sense of community and shared values? Is this where the problems are? Those you can relatively simply measure. There's a lot of frameworks for that. And as you do that, it's really about getting into the modus of having a vocabulary as a leader, but also as an organization about the need to trust. How do we trust each other? How do we develop this based on the behaviors that we as individuals have, so that we can foster that trust that is so important for us as individuals to coexist with each other? Because otherwise we end up being cynical and hateful and all the things we don't want, and then we're back in the negativity that comes out of a low trust culture.
Yeah, very
It was
much
a long
so.
answer, but that's how I see it up in my head.
But good. It made me think of something, that I'm fortunate to work with a company that part of our mission statement is fun.
Yeah.
Right.
So
and
important.
it's been harder to come by in the last couple of years because we don't see each other as often, but it's still there and always a part of who we are. I think that the challenge is sometimes, in order to accomplish that, you actually have to spend money on it as well, right? All these things take an investment. You mentioned, how this trust component kind of needs to start at the very top and become part of the whole culture that everybody buys into. It's always curious to me, though, that once you have if you've tolerated a poor employee and they become a little bitter themselves, that's like, one bad apple creates a lot of bad apples.
Yeah.
So, and once you have that kind of negativity in an organization, it is much harder, if I'm reading it right, to overcome it, with trust. Just seems like, once the leadership is not really aware of it and it's just sort of happening and going on, it just grows too fast. And can really hurt the company.
I mean, rotten apples. I mean, a rotten apple will very, very quickly, spread itself. And it's the same with trust. I mean, trust has to come from top and be contagious all the way down. Yeah. Similar, with the bad apple. But the challenge you have as a leader, and I've been working. I'm not going to say where, but I have been even in dialogues with chairmen where I just didn't felt I had the trust, and therefore I said no, thank you to a job, simply because I knew if I couldn't trust him, how would I ever get the entire organization to trust where we were going? Right. For the exact same reason. And the challenge you have as a leader, if the organization first have lost confidence, lost trust in the journey that you as a chairman or CEO are putting out, it's really, really going to be uphill. Because how do you gain back that? Well, you can then change certain part of your leadership, and you have to do that. But the thing is, if you have lost confidence at the very top, that is an organization who is going to have a very, very, very hard time, and most likely will look like a tailspin of a plane.
You and I have worked for both large companies and small companies.
Yeah.
I have my own feeling, but I wonder how you feel about, is it easier or more difficult for a smaller company versus a larger company to kind of build this trust component into their businesses?
It may be, as a small business, you have the ability to be a little bit more agile in your responses. The distance between the floor of the business where things really get done and the board meeting is usually a little bit shorter, and that gives you a shorter response time. That makes it easier to spot if there is some low trust indicators. But I'm not going to say that in a big organization you can not have a high trust culture, because when the day is over, it's all about the people. because as I said, it's not about how, it's as much more about the who, and it starts with the board, it starts with the CEO, then it goes down. It's really top down. If the leadership in the large organization understands the importance of trust as a value in their leadership structures and how they impose it throughout the organization, a big organization can be as good as a small organization. But it may be easier in a small organization to make adjustments because you may see it earlier. That would be how I see it.
Yeah. I think there's a level of truth in that. I just I've worked for the sole proprietor before, and I wasn't as smart as you in being able to judge whether I could trust them or not. And so the relationship didn't last long because they were not a trustful person, and their motives for the business and how they ran the business were not necessarily completely honorable.
Well, you have a point, and reflecting on what you are saying, it's probably easier to be a politician and hide in a large organization than it is to be a politician that hides in a small organization, because you'll usually be called out a little bit quicker in the smaller versus the larger. So you have a point. Yeah.
I think the maybe what I'm thinking about is kind of executive accountability. When you're the owner and the sole proprietor and the president, the CEO of your own company, you don't really answer to anyone, maybe a higher power, or maybe your spouse, I'm not sure, but you're it, right? And so what you are, it appears to me, is what the business becomes in many, many ways. As a CEO of a larger corporation, you report to the board of directors. So there seems to be this sort of natural built-in accountability level. Of course, if the board of directors is sour, then everything is sour also. But it just seems like each of them have their strengths and their capabilities to build this kind of culture.
Yeah, but again, I will go back and say, the good CEO will be able to communicate truthfully and with authenticity down the organization of the changes that needs to be done, so that the individuals understand why this change is being done and not. Where the problem usually arises is when the logic somehow is missing in the decision that is being communicated. Where I, as if I sit in a division, if I sit in whatever function I sit in, if the logic of what is hitting me just isn't there, the business logic is just unhealthy, it's because it's either because being communicated in a very bad way, and that is a communication problem, or of course there is the opportunity, it's also a bad decision. But those are the things that are part of giving a lower level of engagement, lower level of motivation as for the individuals. And again, that's some of the things, going back to the low trust indicators, that if the logic is missing, the engagement will drop. When engagement drops, you also begin questioning, like, well, that's stupid. Okay, and then you have the good friend, the cynicism coming in. Well, they still anyway don't know what's happening down here. Then you have the coffee cooler discussion, and then that fuels that low trust. And maybe it was just because of a bad communication. But the good CEO, the good leader, will be able to communicate even hard decisions throughout the organization if done, open, honestly, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed is, this technology that we're using right now has been deployed in businesses all around the world over the last couple of years. And so much of our day-to-day business, all of my meetings with my, fellow staff members at Vision33 are all by Zoom, right, or other technologies. And it's great. We'd be lost without it over the last couple of years. So I think we have to be grateful, right, that we live in the age we live. We've kind of coasted in some ways through this pandemic from a business perspective, far greater than we would have without it.
Yeah.
But it's taken away from us an awful lot of, for lack of a better word, transparency into what we're doing, during our workday. And I wonder, and it's just me musing because I have no data about this, whether this whole virtual working experience is creating, less accountability and less visibility into one another's work. And therefore, over time, I don't think it's happened as much yet, but more distrust in an organization about what people are doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is no doubt it's the way of working from home has allowed many the opportunity to just appear two-dimensional because you sit behind the screen and we only see, maybe if you're lucky, the full hair and then somewhere just above the belly, right?
Yeah.
And good for that, by the way. But anyways, I'm just saying that of course you will never get the full engagement in a conversation when you're just virtual. And I think one of the key challenges we will see is that over time, we as a corporate culture, um, and I'm sure you also will see that with the Vision 33, is that the notion of offices, the notion of an HQ is going to be much more like a clubhouse, because there are strengths in working from home because it gives you the opportunity to go in the details, be concentrated, focused. You can have meetings sitting up, shoulder by shoulder, and just very productive if you can administer. But there is a couple of groups of people for whom it just doesn't work. If you're single, this is no fun because you just sit there alone looking at your screen. If you have a relative or spouse or family members who are ill, you still need to be stimulated with something else than negativity. And I think we have to also think about the mental health of our colleagues. And there are some we are losing this way. And then lastly, I would say, as individual, we are social individuals, and therefore we need that clubhouse. We need to probably rethink. We need way more smaller meeting rooms so that we have our working room, and the working room can be at home. It can be in a meeting room where we sit with 4 or 5 people in a project. But we will be much more social when we are together in the clubhouse or the HQ, as opposed to sit in our small cubicles. Because I'm not sure that is going to continue to be the preferred way of having an HQ organized over time. But definitely we need to compensate for the lack of social gatherness as corporate individuals, because we are social human beings. We are not machines sitting behind the screen, as much as it has given us the opportunity to reconnect again. And again, I'm super grateful for that, Carl.
I've been talking with a lot of businesses this year about that aspect of, how they see the future, and many of them are already restructuring their campuses and their office buildings, eliminating whole offices and bringing them all together in one space that's kind of rethought. And so it's given a lot of businesses a reason to think about these things. And at the core of what they're trying to do is, build a better situation for their employees, their staff members, but also build a better culture for the future.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting time because of that. And at the core of that are these concepts of trust, accountability, transparency, right?
Absolutely.
They're all at the core of that. So I so much, Niels, appreciated the article, and it's the excuse of getting back together to talk about it.
I'm so happy for it. Thank you.
And I'm glad that you've been thinking about it, because it encouraged me that somebody else was thinking about this stuff besides me. And so thanks for joining us.
Hopefully those that are also listening in here will also wonder, what are we doing in our organization? And if we just can have, some more people asking that question, am I trustful enough in how I work? Have I enough authenticity in how I communicate? Do I trust my boss? And if not, what I'm going to do about it? Because if it's not there, it's just not going to be fun. And we put way too many hours into our work to be a place where it's no fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough in my life that I learned that one of my greatest skills was being an open book, and it served me well. Right, people feel like they know me. So I don't know how I do it. I just know I do it. And it works.
It's all about being yourself. It's, Carl, I think this is what it's about. It's not about being someone else. It's not about doing something special. It's just being you. And being you is what everybody should be, because A, it's much easier to remember, and B, you're not part of any play, because you say what you do and you do what you say, and people can relate to that. And as I also wrote in another post, I think we all know that within the first 2 or 3 seconds of meeting anyone, we know if we're going to trust them. Just that sense. I mean, of course, there are some where they don't have, but most people relatively quickly can assess if this is going to work or not work.
Yeah.
And they have to feel that intuition. And that comes with meeting someone who just are who they are, who have that vulnerability, who have that authenticity, and just being them. We all have a space here. We're all important. We all have a role to be played, as long as we play our own role and don't try to pretend we're something we're not, because that's where it usually fails.
And on that, those are good words to end by. So, Niels, thank you for joining us today. And everyone out there, we'll see you next time. But until then, stay connected.